England stands among the most ancient political communities on Earth, a land whose identity was forged through centuries of struggle, migration, and survival. Although many peoples contributed to its formation, none shaped its early destiny more profoundly than the Anglo-Saxons, the Germanic settlers who would eventually give the English their name. Yet for much of their early history, these people did not exist as a single nation. Instead, they were fragmented into rival kingdoms, each ruled by its own dynasty, each guarding its own traditions, and each frequently locked in conflict with its neighbors. The idea of a unified England was not a natural inheritance but a hard-won achievement, born out of crisis rather than cooperation. That crisis arrived with the thunder of oars and the crack of axes as Scandinavian raiders descended upon the British Isles. It was the Viking invasions, violent, relentless, and transformative, that forced the Anglo-Saxons to abandon division and pursue unity. By the early 10th century, after generations of warfare, resistance, and reform, the Kingdom of England finally emerged. This is the story of how that transformation occurred, how the Saxons endured near total collapse, and how the once overlooked House of Wessex rose from obscurity to bind a fractured land into a single realm. When Roman legions withdrew from Britain in the early 5th century, they left behind more than abandoned forts and crumbling roads. They created a vacuum of authority that invited new peoples to claim the island. From the shores of northern Europe came waves of Germanic migrants, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, who crossed the North Sea and gradually carved out territories of their own. These newcomers were initially pagan, bound by warrior traditions and kinship loyalties. But over time they embraced Christianity and adapted Roman, administrative ideas to their own needs. From this fusion arose a patchwork of kingdoms: Northumbria in the north, Mercia dominating the Midlands, East Anglia along the eastern coast, and southern realms such as Kent, Sussex, Essex, and Wessex. Though they shared language, ancestry, and faith, these kingdoms were anything but united. Each possessed its own legal customs, royal genealogies, and founding legends. Power was measured through land ownership, military success, and the favor of the church, and kings constantly tested one another through warfare and shifting alliances. By the late 8th century, however, threats emerged that no single kingdom could easily withstand. Across the North Sea, the Scandinavian world was undergoing intense pressure. Population growth strained limited farmland. Political consolidation under powerful rulers disrupted traditional structures. An expanding Frankish power pushed many ambitious warriors to seek fortune elsewhere. These pressures unleashed a generation of seafarers, traders, settlers, raiders, and mercenaries, who took to the oceans in sleek, longships capable of navigating both open seas and shallow rivers. At first, their appearances along English shores seemed isolated and insignificant. A brief landing in Wessex in 789 ended with the death of a local official and little more. But this incident foreshadowed a far darker future. In 793, Viking warriors struck the monastery of Lindisfarne, one of the most sacred religious centers in Britain. The slaughter of monks and the desecration of holy relics shocked Christendom. Chroniclers describe the event as divine punishment, and fear spread far beyond England's borders. Following Lindisfarne, Viking attacks multiplied rapidly. Coastal monasteries and prosperous towns became prime targets, their wealth undefended and their locations vulnerable. Advances in shipbuilding allowed Norse raiders to strike swiftly, vanish before organized resistance could form, and return year after year. By the mid-9th century, even major urban centers such as London, Canterbury, and Winchester felt the weight of these incursions. Success bred ambition, and ambition transformed raiding into conquest. What began as seasonal violence evolved into a coordinated campaign to dominate the island itself. That transformation became unmistakable in 865 with the arrival of a massive force remembered as the Great Heathen Army. Unlike earlier bands of raiders, this host came prepared not merely to plunder but to stay, drawing warriors from across the Viking world, from Scandinavia itself, as well as from established settlements in Ireland and continental Europe. The army numbered in the thousands. Its leaders, including the formidable figures of Ivar, Ub, and Halfdan, sought nothing less than total domination. Their first great victory came in 866 with the seizure of York, the heart of Northumbria. Efforts by the local kings to reclaim the city ended in disaster, with both rulers slain. Soon afterward, East Anglia fell, and its king Edmund was killed, later revered as a martyr. One by one, the old Anglo-Saxon kingdoms collapsed under the Viking onslaught. Leadership of the invading forces shifted as campaigns expanded. While some commanders departed to pursue wars elsewhere, others pressed deeper into England. Wessex, long overshadowed by stronger neighbors, now stood as the final independent Saxon realm. Its survival depended on resilience, compromise, and luck. Early encounters were costly, and its king, Æthelflæd, died amid the fighting. His brother, Alfred, inherited a kingdom on the brink of annihilation. Initially, Alfred chose survival over pride, paying tribute to buy time. Yet the threat never vanished. Viking leaders regrouped, reorganized, and struck again. The darkest moment came in the winter of 878. After a fragile peace was broken, Viking forces launched a surprise assault on the royal center at Chippenham during the Christmas season. The attack shattered what remained of Wessex's stability. Alfred barely escaped capture and vanished into the western wetlands of Somerset, pursued by enemies and abandoned by many of his own nobles. For months, he lived as a fugitive king, gathering strength among loyal followers while much of the countryside submitted to Viking rule. The survival of England hung by a thread. Fortune shifted through perseverance and timely resistance. Loyal leaders repelled Viking advances elsewhere, preventing Alfred from being encircled. Emerging from hiding, Alfred summoned the men of Wessex to arms. Against expectation, they answered. Thousands assembled, driven by desperation and loyalty, and together they marched to confront the invaders. The decisive encounter occurred near Edington. There, Alfred's forces formed a disciplined shield wall and endured repeated Viking assaults. The battle raged throughout the day until Viking resolve faltered. Forced into retreat, their army was pursued and besieged. Starving and broken, their leader Guthrum surrendered. Victory brought transformation rather than annihilation. Alfred demanded conversion rather than execution. Guthrum accepted baptism, symbolizing not only personal submission, but a political settlement that reshaped England's future. Peace followed, and borders were drawn between Saxon and Danish-controlled lands. Alfred emerged not merely as a survivor, but as a reformer. He rebuilt Wessex into a fortress state, constructing fortified towns, reorganizing military service, and establishing a defensive navy. Governance was strengthened, loyalty rewarded, and betrayal punished. These changes ensured that England would never again be caught unprepared. Beyond defense, Alfred pursued unity. Mercia, weakened and leaderless, aligned itself with Wessex under a subordinate ruler. Marriage alliances bound the kingdoms together, and London was reclaimed and restored as a political and economic center. When Alfred died, he left behind a realm transformed, stable, organized, and capable of expansion. His successors inherited not chaos, but a foundation. Under Edward and his sister Æthelflæd, resistance turned into reconquest. Through coordinated campaigns, fortified advances, and strategic alliances, the English steadily dismantled Viking control across the Midlands and beyond. Victory followed victory, not through reckless battle, but through planning and persistence. By the time Æthelstan ascended the throne, England was no longer a collection of rival peoples struggling for survival. It was a kingdom united by shared law, faith, and purpose, born from hardship and forged through resilience. What began as a scattered response to invasion became the creation of a nation. Against overwhelming odds, the Saxons endured conquest, betrayal, and near extinction. From the marshes of Somerset to the walls of York, their struggle reshaped the destiny of Britain. In overcoming the Viking storm, they did more than survive. They laid the foundations of England itself. Alongside her offensive operations, she also focused on shielding her realm from sudden strikes launched across the Irish Sea. Anticipating the scale of the coming conflict, strategic decisions were made to streamline command and coordination between Mercia and Wessex. As part of this preparation, the important Mercian centers of London and Oxford were transferred into Edward's authority, allowing for tighter control of the frontier zones. Between the years 912 and 915, Æthelflæd embarked on an ambitious program of fortification along Mercia's vulnerable borders. She oversaw the establishment of heavily defended strongholds at Warwick, Tamworth, Stafford, Runcorn, and Edinburgh, each positioned to block Viking movement and secure key routes. At the same time, Edward pursued more incremental gains of his own. Advancing into Essex, he reinforced his dominance by constructing a fortified settlement at Witham. Additional defensive works soon followed at Hertford and Buckingham, and the capture of Bedford further tightened English control over the region. These fortified towns, known as burhs, were not a new invention. Alfred had originally designed them as a defensive network to blunt Viking raids. However, his successors adapted the system into something far more dynamic. Under Edward and Æthelflæd, burhs became instruments of expansion as well as protection. They served as forward operating bases from which armies could launch deep incursions into Viking-held territory, while also anchoring newly conquered lands under permanent English authority. This shift in strategy marked a turning point in the long struggle against the Danelaw, transforming the conflict from a defensive war of survival into a coordinated campaign of reconquest. The decisive phase of this struggle arrived in 917, a year that proved catastrophic for the Viking position in England. English forces struck simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming the enemy's ability to respond. Edward advanced from the south, while Æthelflæd pressed in from the west, forcing the Danes to divide their strength. During a brutal confrontation at Derby in the summer, Æthelflæd paid a heavy price, losing several trusted commanders. Despite these losses, her army prevailed, capturing one of the most important Danish strongholds in the Midlands. Meanwhile, Edward's fortified border positions successfully repelled repeated Viking counterattacks in the east. Later that summer, he turned his attention to Chelmsford, where the defenders fought fiercely. During the siege, the King of East Anglia and several leading nobles were killed, shattering Viking leadership before the town finally fell. Momentum now lay firmly with the English. As autumn approached, Edward's forces swept through the region, seizing Colchester, Northampton, and Huntingdon in rapid succession. New fortifications were raised at Colchester and Huntingdon to secure these gains and prepare for further advances. Recognizing the inevitability of defeat, the remaining Viking leaders chose surrender over destruction. Before the year ended, both the Danes of East Anglia and the Viking garrison at Cambridge submitted to Edward's authority. This surrender brought an end to nearly half a century of Norse dominance in East Anglia and marked one of the most significant milestones in the English reconquest. The following year saw continued progress. Edward pushed deeper into the East Midlands, marching northeast in late spring to capture the fortified Viking settlement at Stamford. Simultaneously, Æthelflæd secured Leicester, further dismantling Danish control in the region. Yet this triumph was overshadowed by tragedy. In the summer of 918, Æthelflæd died, depriving Mercia of one of its most capable and respected leaders. Her daughter, Lewin, succeeded her as ruler, assuming the title Lady of the Mercians. Initially, Edward appeared willing to accept this arrangement, perhaps viewing it as a temporary solution while he continued operations elsewhere. Edward soon resumed his campaigns, focusing on the northeastern Midlands and capturing Nottingham, a move that placed immense pressure on the remaining Viking authorities to submit. By this point, only the Kingdom of York remained as an independent Norse power in England. However, events within Mercia soon altered the political landscape. In December of 918, Edward returned west, seized Tamworth, and removed Lewin from power. The reasons behind this decision remain uncertain. It may be that Edward had never intended her rule to be permanent, or that she had failed to secure the loyalty of Mercian elites. Whatever the cause, Lewin was sent into religious confinement, and Mercia was formally absorbed into Edward's kingdom, ending its separate political existence. At roughly the same time, developments in the north introduced a new challenge. A Viking leader named Ragnar captured York, establishing himself as ruler. He belonged to a powerful Norse-Irish dynasty descended from Ivar, one of the original commanders of the Great Heathen Army. Ragnar had already demonstrated his strength by defeating the rulers of Bamberg and Scotland, making him a formidable threat. In response, Edward strengthened his northern defenses, constructing new burhs at Nottingham, Bakewell, Manchester, and Thelwall. He also pursued diplomacy, coordinating with Christian rulers in Bamberg, Strathclyde, and Scotland to isolate Ragnar politically. This pressure eventually forced the Viking leader to negotiate. In 920, a treaty was signed at Bakewell, bringing a fragile peace to the region. Ragnar's death the following year altered the balance once again. His brother, Sihtric, inherited the throne of York and maintained peaceful relations with Edward for several years. Despite Edward's success, dissent lingered within Mercia. Some resented West Saxon domination and viewed Edward's removal of Lewin as unjust. These separatist sentiments culminated in a rebellion at Chester in 924. The uprising was swiftly crushed by Edward, but the campaign proved fatal. Gravely wounded, the king died shortly afterward, leaving the succession unresolved. The death of Edward opened a brief but dangerous period of uncertainty. Mercian leaders favored his eldest son, Æthelstan, who had been raised among them, while the West Saxon nobility supported his younger son, Æthelflæd. Tension simmered as both sides maneuvered for advantage. In August of 924, Æthelflæd set out to meet his brother, but died unexpectedly at Oxford, clearing the way for Æthelstan's accession. His upbringing in Mercia allowed him to bridge the divide between the two regions, presenting himself as a ruler of all the English. His coronation at Kingston upon Thames, a symbolic border town, reinforced this message of unity. Æthelstan moved swiftly to secure his realm. He renewed peace with York through diplomacy, arranging the marriage of his sister to King Sihtric in 926 and overseeing his conversion to Christianity. Yet fate intervened once more, and Sihtric died within a year. Before a new Viking claimant could arrive from Dublin, Æthelstan marched north and seized York, claiming it for himself. Summoning the rulers of Britain to a great assembly, he secured their submission and bound them by oath to oppose Viking alliances. For the first time, England stood united under a single monarch. The work of generations, begun by Alfred, expanded by Edward, and completed by Æthelstan, had finally forged a kingdom.